Hey guys, before the video starts, I want to say that I added a join button where you can become member of Mr. Prodanov's family, listen to the stories with no ads, and receive shout out every new video. And also, to all those who are new, feel free to subscribe. It can help a lot. The dark web detective who solved mysteries for a deadly price. Hey everyone, this is going to be a bit of a long post, but I need to get this off my chest. My name's Jake, and I'm a private investigator. Well, I was. I guess you could say I still am, but after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I'll ever take another case again. What I'm about to share is disturbing, terrifying, and downright horrifying. This isn't for the faint of heart. It all started about a year ago. I was getting fed up with the usual cheating spouses and insurance fraud cases. They were boring and didn't pay much. I wanted something different, something that would really challenge me. So, when I got an anonymous email asking if I took jobs from the dark web, I was intrigued. The email was brief, saying only that I'd be paid handsomely for my services and that the cases would be unique. I responded out of curiosity more than anything. Within an hour, I got a reply with a link to a tour website. The page was a mess of black and red text, flashing images, and a chat box. A user named The Curator welcomed me and asked if I was ready for a real challenge. I typed back, saying I was interested. That's when things started to get weird. The first case was straightforward enough. A missing person. A woman had disappeared after meeting someone she'd been talking to on a dating app. Her family was desperate and had turned to the dark web as a last resort. They provided all her details, including her last known location and the username of the person she met. I dug in and found her pretty quickly, or what was left of her. She was in a rundown apartment in a seedy part of the town, chained to a radiator. The smell hit me first. It was a mix of urine, feces, and something else, something metallic, blood. She was barely alive, her body covered in cuts and bruises. I called the cops and got the hell out of there before they arrived. The curator contacted me shortly after, praising my quick work. The payment was more than generous, enough to keep me comfortable for months. I should have walked away then, but the money and the thrill of the hunt were too tempting. The next few cases were more of the same. Missing persons, kidnapped children, all ending in me finding them barely alive, or more often dead. But then, things escalated. One night, the curator sent me a link to a live stream. The video quality was terrible, but I could make out a dark room with a single chair in the middle. A woman was tied to it, sobbing and begging for her life. The chat was filled with people placing bets on how long she had lost. The curator's message was clear. Find her before it's too late. I worked frantically, tracing IP addresses, following leads, and cross-referencing databases. I managed to find the location just as they started to, well, they began torturing her. They used tools I'd only seen in horror movies, pliers, scalpels, even a blowtorch. Her screams still haunt my dreams. I busted in and managed to take down the sick fucks running the place, but it was too late for her. She died in my arms, her eyes pleading with me for a mercy I couldn't provide. That's when I started to question what I was doing, but the curator kept pulling me back in with promises of more money, more challenging cases. Each job took a piece of my soul. Each victim's eyes burned into my mind. I became obsessed, needing to save just one person to make up for all the ones I couldn't. Then came the case that broke me. The curator sent me another link, this time to a series of videos. Each one showed a different person, all of whom I had saved, being killed in the most brutal ways imaginable. They were being hunted, stalked, and then slaughtered. Their screams, the looks of terror on their faces. It was too much. The final video was the worst. It showed a live feed of my apartment. The camera panned around, settling on a woman tied to a chair in my living room. It was my sister. She was bloody, bruised, and gagged. The message was clear. Come alone, or she dies. I didn't call the cops. I knew they wouldn't be able to help. I grabbed my gun and rushed home, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got there, the door was already open. I stepped inside, calling out for my sister. The place was trashed, furniture overturned, pictures smashed. I found her in the living room, just like in the video, but she wasn't alone. The curator was there, masked and holding a knife to her throat. You've done well, Jake, he said, his voice distorted by a modulator. But you should have walked away when you had the chance. Before I could react, he slit her throat. Her blood sprayed across the room, her eyes wide with shock and pain. I screamed and lunged at him, but he was gone before I could get to him. I held my sister as she died, her blood soaking my clothes. I've spent every day since then trying to find the curator, to make him pay for what he did, but he's always one step ahead, taunting me with new cases, new victims. I'm trapped in this nightmare, and I don't know if I'll ever get out. So yeah, that's my story. If you ever get an offer to work on the dark web, don't take it. No amount of money is worth what it will cost you. Stay safe, everyone. It's been months since my sister's death, and every day has been a blur of anger, grief, and obsession. I couldn't let the curator get away with it. I buried myself in my work, scouring the dark web for any trace of him. Every lead was a dead end, every clue another step into the abyss. I started to notice patterns in the cases the curator sent me. Each victim had a connection to someone I had saved or tried to save. It was like he was playing a sick game, taunting me with people I couldn't protect. The worst part was that I couldn't turn away. I had to keep going, had to find him and make him pay. One night, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line simply read, "Next." My heart sank as I opened it. It was a video file. I hesitated for a moment before pressing play. The screen flickered to life, showing a dimly lit basement. Chains hung from the ceiling, and in the center of the room was a figure tied to a chair, a bag over their head. The camera zoomed in, and a gloved hand appeared, yanking the bag off. My blood ran cold. It was my best friend, Mike. His face was battered and bruised, one eye swollen shut. He was gagged, and his eyes darted around in terror. The camera panned to the wall behind him, where a message was scrawled in blood. "Save him if you can." The video cut off, replaced by coordinates. I grabbed my gear and raced to the location, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the town. My mind was racing, filled with memories of Mike and me growing up together, getting into trouble, and always having each other's backs. I couldn't let him down. The warehouse was dark and silent, the air thick with the stench of decay. I crept inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. I followed the sound of muffled cries, my heart pounding in my ears. I found Mike in a small room at the back, tied to the same chair from the video. He was barely conscious, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. I rushed to him, untying the ropes and pulling the gag from his mouth. "Jake," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's a trap. You have to get out of here." Before I could respond, the lights flickered on, and I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see a group of masked figures, each holding a weapon. The curator's voice echoed through the room, distorted and chilling. "Welcome, Jake. You've done well to get this far, but this is where your journey ends." The figures closed in, and I fought with everything I had, but there were too many of them. They overwhelmed me, pinning me to the ground. I watched in horror as one of them grabbed Mike, dragging him to the center of the room. They tied him up again, and the curator stepped forward, holding a knife. "No!" I screamed, struggling against my captors. "Please don't." The curator ignored me, plunging the knife into Mike's chest. His scream echoed through the warehouse, and I felt a part of me die with him. They left me there, beaten and broken, next to Mike's lifeless body. Hours passed before I could muster the strength to move. I crawled to him, tears streaming down my face. I buried Mike the next day, a simple ceremony with just a few close friends. I didn't tell them what really happened. How could I? They wouldn't understand. I barely understood it myself. The days that followed were a blur. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. All I could think about was finding the curator. I spent every waking moment on the dark web, searching for any clue, any hint of where he might be. The guilt was eating me alive. I had failed everyone I cared about. My sister, Mike, all the victims. Their faces haunted me, their screams echoing in my mind. Then one night, I got another email. This time, there was no video, no coordinates, just a single sentence. "You're next." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I knew he was coming for me, but I was ready. I had nothing left to lose. I prepared myself, setting traps around my apartment and arming myself with every weapon I had. I wasn't going down without a fight. Days passed, and I was on edge, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I barely slept, keeping watch through the night. Then one evening, I heard it. A soft click, the unmistakable sound of a lock being picked. I grabbed my gun and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. I flicked the safety off and aimed, but before I could fire, a blinding pain exploded in my head. Everything went black. When I came to, I was tied to a chair, a bag over my head. I could hear voices, whispers in the darkness. The bag was yanked off, and I found myself staring into the cold, dead eyes of the curator. He was unmasked, but his face was a blur, indistinguishable. "Welcome, Jake," he said, his voice calm and menacing. "This is the end of the line." He held up a syringe, the needle glinting in the dim light. "This will be quick. A fitting end for someone who thought he could outsmart me." I struggled against the ropes, but it was no use. The needle pierced my skin, and a burning sensation spread through my veins. My vision blurred, darkness closing in around me. As I slipped into unconsciousness, I realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. When I woke up, I was in a different place. The smell of antiseptic and the constant hum of machinery told me I was in a hospital. My body felt heavy, and I struggled to open my eyes. The room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the beeping of a heart monitor. I tried to move, but my limbs felt like lead. A nurse noticed I was awake and rushed over. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice gentle but edged with something I couldn't quite place. "You were found outside a warehouse, barely breathing." My mind was foggy, The events leading up to this moment, a jumbled mess. I managed to croak out, "Where am I?" "You're in St. Mary's Hospital," she replied, adjusting the IV in my arm. "You've been here for a week. You were in pretty bad shape when they brought you in." A week. I had been unconscious for a week. My thoughts raced as I tried to piece together what had happened. The curator, the syringe, the darkness. Why was I still alive? What game was he playing now? Over the next few days, I slowly regained my strength. The doctors and nurses were tight-lipped about how I was found, and the police didn't have any answers either. They asked me questions, but I couldn't tell them much. I didn't trust them. The curator had too many connections, too many ways to manipulate things. I had to be careful. Once I was discharged, I went back to my apartment. It felt like stepping into a crime scene. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The remnants of my failed trap scattered around. I couldn't stay there. The walls felt like they were closing in, the silence deafening. I packed a bag and checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the town, paying in cash and using a fake name. I needed to disappear, to regroup and figure out my next move. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mike, my sister, all the victims. Their faces haunted me, their screams echoing in my mind. I knew the curator was still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. I spent my days scouring the dark web, following any lead, no matter how small. I barely slept, fueled by caffeine and sheer determination. I became a ghost, drifting through the shadows, always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. One night, I got another email. This one was different. It wasn't from the curator. It was from someone claiming to have information about him. The message was brief, telling me to meet at an old diner on the outskirts of town. It was a risk, but I had no other leads. I had to take it. I arrived at the diner just after midnight. It was empty, the flickering neon sign casting eerie shadows across the parking lot. I took a seat in a corner booth, my back to the wall, and waited. A few minutes later, a man walked in. He was tall, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He sat down across from me, his gaze intense. "You're Jake," he said, more a statement than a question. I nodded, my hand resting on the handle of the knife I had concealed under the table. "Who are you?" He glanced around nervously before leaning in. "I'm someone who knows what you're dealing with. I've been tracking the curator for years. He's not just some sicko on the dark web. He's part of something bigger." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "The curator is part of a network, a group of people who get off on watching others suffer. They pay big money for these live streams, and the curator is one of their top producers. They call themselves the Consortium." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I used to be one of them," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I got out, but they've been hunting me ever since. I've been trying to take them down, but I can't do it alone. I didn't trust him, but I didn't have a choice. What do you need from me?" He slid a flash drive across the table. "This has everything I've gathered on them. Names, locations, financial records. It's not enough to bring them down, but it's a start. You and I, we can do this together." I took the flash drive, my mind racing. This was it, the break I had been waiting for. But it also meant diving deeper into the darkness, risking everything. "What's your name?" I asked. "Call me Tom," he said, standing up. "I'll be in touch." He left the diner, and I was alone again. I paid for my coffee and left, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. Back at the motel, I plugged it into my laptop and began to sift through the files. It was a goldmine of information. Names of consortium members, transaction records, even video files of their sick exploits. As I dug deeper, I realized the scope of what I was dealing with. The consortium had ties to powerful people, government officials, corporate executives, all with a vested interest in keeping their activities hidden. Taking them down wouldn't be easy, but I was committed. I had to be. Too many lives had been destroyed, and I couldn't let it continue. Over the next few weeks, Tom and I worked together, piecing together the puzzle. We identified key members, tracked their movements, and slowly began to dismantle their operations. It was dangerous work, and we had a few close calls, but we were making progress. Then one night, I got a call from Tom. His voice was frantic, panicked. "They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. You have to finish this, Jake. Promise me." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. I knew then that Tom was gone. They had gotten to him, and I was next. I packed up my things and moved to a new motel, constantly looking over my shoulder. I knew I had to be careful, but I couldn't stop now. I had to finish what we started. For Tom, for Mike, for my sister. The files on the flash drive became my lifeline, guiding me deeper into the darkness. I knew it was only a matter of time before the curator made his next move, and I had to be ready. The hunt was on, and this time I wouldn't stop until I had taken them all down, no matter the cost. Every day felt like walking on the edge of a razor blade. Paranoia became my constant companion, and the lines between reality and nightmare blurred. The deeper I delved into the consortium's operations, the more I realized just how vast and insidious their network was. They had eyes everywhere, and I had to stay one step ahead. One night, as I was sifting through the files, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a video file labeled Experiment 32. I hesitated before clicking on it, bracing myself for whatever horror awaited. The screen flickered to life, showing a sterile white room. In the center was a young girl, no older than 12, strapped to a metal table. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she was gagged, her muffled cries echoing through the room. A figure in a lab coat entered the frame, holding a syringe. He approached the girl, speaking in a calm, soothing voice that made my skin crawl. "This will only hurt for a moment," he said, as he injected her with the syringe. The girl's body convulsed, her eyes rolling back into her head. The video cut off abruptly, replaced by a message. Subject 32 did not survive. Next candidate scheduled for testing. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just about torture and murder. The consortium was experimenting on people, children, for some twisted purpose. I had to stop them, but I was just one man against a powerful, shadowy organization. I continued to dig, uncovering more videos, more evidence of their atrocities. Each discovery fueled my rage and determination. I had to bring these monsters to justice, no matter the cost. Tom's files led me to a name, Dr. Adrian Keller. He was a high-ranking member of the consortium, overseeing their research division. His medical license had been revoked years ago for unethical practices, but he had disappeared before he could be prosecuted. Now, he was one of their top operatives, and I had to find him. I traced Dr. Keller to an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the town. It was a decrepit, crumbling building surrounded by a tall, rusty fence. The windows were boarded up, and the whole place had an eerie, foreboding atmosphere. It was the perfect place for their sick experiments. I waited until nightfall before making my move. Clad in black, I scaled the fence and made my way inside. The interior was just as decayed as the outside, the walls covered in peeling paint and mold. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something metallic, blood. I crept through the hallways, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound made my heart race. I reached the basement, the source of the smell, and found a heavy metal door. It was slightly ajar, and I could hear muffled voices inside. I peeked through the crack and saw Dr. Keller and two other men in lab coats standing over a young boy strapped to a table. The boy was unconscious, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Dr. Keller was holding a scalpel, and the other men were preparing some kind of machine. I knew I had to act fast. I kicked the door open, my gun drawn. "Step away from the boy," I shouted. The men looked up in shock, and Dr. Keller's face twisted into a cruel smile. "Ah, Jake, we've been expecting you." Before I could react, one of the men lunged at me. We struggled, and I managed to get a shot off, hitting him in the shoulder. He screamed and fell to the floor, clutching his wound. The other man ran at me with a syringe, but I dodged and knocked it from his hand, slamming him against the wall. Dr. Keller didn't move. He just watched, that sick smile never leaving his face. "You're too late, Jake," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "The experiment is already in progress." I turned my attention to the boy on the table. His eyes were open now, filled with fear. I had to get him out of there. I untied the straps and helped him to his feet. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe now." But as we turned to leave, Dr. Keller pressed a button on the machine, and the boy convulsed, screaming in agony. I tried to hold him, to stop whatever was happening, but it was no use. He collapsed, his body limp. Rage consumed me. I turned to Dr. Keller, my vision red with fury. "You're going to pay for this," I growled. He laughed, a chilling, soulless sound. "You can't stop us, Jake. The consortium is everywhere. You're just one man." I raised my gun, ready to end him, but before I could pull the trigger, the room filled with smoke. I coughed, my eyes burning, and stumbled backward. When the smoke cleared, Dr. Keller was gone. I was left alone in that hellish basement, the boy's lifeless body at my feet. I had failed again. Another innocent life lost because of me. I took the boy's body and left the hospital, my heart heavy with grief and anger. I couldn't keep doing this alone. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I reached out to a few trusted contacts, explaining the situation as best as I could. Some of them thought I was crazy, but a few agreed to help. Together, we formed a plan. We would expose the consortium, bring their atrocities to light, and take them down once and for all. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. We started by leaking the evidence we had to the media, the videos, the financial records, everything. It caused an uproar, but the consortium was quick to cover their tracks, discrediting the evidence and silencing those who spoke out. We were fighting an uphill battle, but we couldn't give up. As we continued our efforts, I received another email from the curator. It was a single sentence: "You're running out of time." I knew he was right. We had to move quickly before they found us. We tracked Dr. Keller to a new location, a mansion in the countryside, heavily guarded and isolated. It was their main base of operations, and we had to strike hard and fast. We gathered our resources, ready for one final assault. It was a suicide mission, but we had no choice. We couldn't let the consortium continue their reign of terror. The night of the assault, we approached the mansion under the cover of darkness. Our hearts pounded with a mix of fear and determination. This was it, the final battle. We breached the mansion, taking our guards as we went. The place was a labyrinth of corridors and hidden rooms, each one filled with horrors beyond imagination. We fought our way to the basement, where we found Dr. Keller and the curator, surrounded by their loyal followers. The battle was brutal. We lost good people, but we fought with everything we had. I confronted the curator, the man who had destroyed my life. He was as cold and calculating as ever, but I was fueled by vengeance. We fought, and I managed to overpower him, pinning him to the ground. "This is for my sister, for Mike, for everyone you've hurt," I snarled, pressing my gun to his head. But before I could pull the trigger, he laughed. "You still don't get it, do you? This is bigger than you and me. You can't stop us." I hesitated for a moment, but then I pulled the trigger, ending his life. The room fell silent, the remaining followers surrendering or fleeing. We had won, but at what cost? The mansion was filled with the bodies of the innocent, victims of the consortium's sick experiments. We freed those who were still alive, but their eyes were hollow, their spirits broken. We had exposed the consortium, but the fight was far from over. There were still members out there, still operating in the shadows, but for now, we had struck a blow against them, and that was enough. I knew I could never go back to my old life. I was a changed man, haunted by the ghosts of the past, but I had found a new purpose, a new mission. I would continue to hunt the consortium, to bring them down, one by one, until justice was served. As I walked away from the mansion, the dawn breaking on the horizon, I felt a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't alone, and together we would make sure the consortium paid for their sins. The battle at the mansion marked the beginning of the end for the consortium. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything I had ever seen. The evidence we had leaked went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media and news outlets. People were horrified by the extent of the atrocities, and the public outcry was deafening. Authorities launched massive investigations, and arrests were made around the world. High-profile members of the consortium, previously untouchable due to their wealth and influence, were brought to justice. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Too many lives had been lost. Too many innocents had suffered. In the months that followed, I tried to find some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible. The nightmares were relentless, the faces of the victims haunting me day and night. I had become a ghost of my former self, consumed by guilt and grief. One evening, as I was nursing a bottle of whiskey in my dingy motel room, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, my heart racing. "Hello? Jake, it's Tom." His voice was faint, barely a whisper. "Tom? I thought you were dead," I exclaimed, my mind reeling. "I managed to escape. Barely. I've been in hiding, recovering. But I have something you need to see. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. Midnight." The line went dead, and I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Tom was alive, and he had something important. I gathered my things and headed to the warehouse, my senses on high alert. The warehouse was dark and silent, the air thick with the scent of damp and decay. I found Tom in a small office at the back, looking worse for wear, but alive. He handed me a flash drive. This has everything, the final piece of the puzzle. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the files. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a list of names, powerful individuals who had funded the consortium, who had enabled their horrific experiments and profited from the suffering of others. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities, people who had seemed untouchable. "This is it," Tom said, his voice shaky. "With this, we can bring them all down." We worked together to compile the evidence, making sure every name, every transaction was documented. We reached out to trusted journalists, people who had been following the story and were committed to uncovering the truth. The fallout was immediate and explosive. High-profile resignations, criminal charges, and public shaming followed as the world learned the true extent of the consortium's reach. It was a moment of vindication, but it came with a heavy price. Tom and I knew we were marked men. We had struck a devastating blow to a powerful organization, and they would stop at nothing to silence us. We went into hiding, constantly moving, never staying in one place for too long. The paranoia was suffocating, but it was the only way to stay alive. We continued to gather evidence, to expose the remaining members of the consortium. It was a never-ending battle, but we were committed to seeing it through. One night, as I was holed up in yet another motel, I got an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "Final warning." My heart pounded as I opened it. It was a video file. I clicked play, and the curator's face appeared on the screen. He was alive. "You think you've won, Jake, but this is far from over. We are everywhere. We are eternal. You can't stop us." The video cut to a live feed of Tom, tied to a chair, beaten and bloody. My blood ran cold. "You have one chance to save him. Come alone, and we can end this." I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't abandon Tom. I grabbed my gear and made my way to the address included in the email. It was another abandoned building, the perfect place for an ambush. I entered cautiously, my gun drawn. The place was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. I found Tom in a dark room, just as the video had shown. He was barely conscious, his face a mess of bruises. "Jake," he whispered, his voice weak. "It's a trap." Before I could respond, the lights flickered on, and a group of masked figures surrounded me. The curator stepped forward, his face hidden behind a mask. "Welcome, Jake." So predictable. I aimed my gun at him, my hands shaking with rage. "Let him go." The curator laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "This ends now. You and your friend here will be the final act in our little show." The masked figures closed in, but I fought with everything I had. The room erupted into chaos, gunshots and screams echoing off the walls. I managed to take down a few of them, but there were too many. In the midst of the chaos, Tom broke free from his restraints and tackled the curator. They struggled, and I saw my chance. I aimed and fired, hitting the curator in the chest. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath. "Jake," he rasped, his voice filled with malice. "This isn't over." With one final breath, he died. The remaining masked figures fled, leaving Tom and me alone in the aftermath. We were battered and bruised, but alive. We called the authorities and provided them with the final evidence needed to dismantle the consortium. It was a long process, but eventually, justice was served. The surviving members were hunted down, arrested, and prosecuted. The world slowly began to heal from the horrors they had inflicted. As for Tom and me, we went our separate ways, each trying to rebuild our shattered lives. The scars, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal, but we had done what we set out to do. We had brought down the consortium. I moved to a small town, far from the chaos and darkness of my past. I tried to find some semblance of peace, but the memories always lingered. I knew I could never fully escape the shadows, but I could live with the knowledge that we had made a difference, that we had saved lives. So, here I am, sharing my story. A warning to anyone who might be tempted to delve into the dark corners of the internet, to take on more than they can handle. The dark web is a place of nightmares, and once you enter, you may never truly escape. Stay safe, and if you ever find yourself in the crosshairs of something you don't understand, walk away. Some battles aren't worth the cost. The end. The Untraceable Dark Web Assassin who left me chilling messages. Hey Reddit. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post something like this, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone can help me make sense of it all, because I'm barely holding it together. For context, I work in IT and, yeah, I know my way around the internet, including the dark corners most people avoid. I always thought I could handle it, but I was dead wrong. It started a few months ago. I was browsing the dark web out of sheer boredom, looking for nothing in particular. Just the usual, morbid curiosity. You know, seeing what shady shit people were selling. That kind of thing. But then, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. There was a listing for an assassin. Yeah, you read that right. This wasn't some cheap hitman for hire gig either. The description was disturbingly detailed. They called themselves the Untraceable One, claimed they could make anyone disappear without a trace, no matter how secure they thought they were. The listing had a bunch of 5-star reviews, all praising the efficiency and discretion of this service. I should have clicked away. I should have closed the browser and never looked back, but I didn't. I was too intrigued, too stupidly curious for my own good. I decided to dig a little deeper, see if I could find out more. I found forums discussing this Untraceable One in hushed, reverent tones. People claimed they'd seen proof photos, videos of the aftermath, horrifying grisly scenes that were burned into my brain forever. Victims found with their eyes gouged out, limbs twisted in ways that defied nature, organs arranged in grotesque displays. It was like something out of a nightmare, but it got worse. I started receiving messages. At first, they were just cryptic notes, things like, "I see you," and "You're next." I thought it was some troll messing with me because I was poking around where I shouldn't. But then they became more personal. They knew my name, my address, details about my life that no one should know. It was like someone was watching me. Every move I made, every breath I took. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every shadow out of the corner of my eye. I was convinced it was them. I started seeing things, figures lurking in the dark, faces peering through my windows. My friends noticed I was on edge, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain that a dark web assassin was targeting me because of my own stupid curiosity? The messages escalated. They sent me pictures of myself, candid shots taken when I was unaware, at the grocery store, in my living room, even in my bedroom. There was one where I was sleeping, the camera angle from above, as if they were standing over me. I lost it. I screamed and trashed my room, throwing anything I could get my hands on. How the fuck were they doing this? How were they getting so close without me knowing? One night, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Another message. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. This time, it was a video. It started with static, then slowly came into focus. It was my bedroom, filmed from the foot of my bed. I could see myself, sleeping soundly, oblivious to the horror unfolding. The camera zoomed in, slowly, until my sleeping face filled the screen. Then a gloved hand reached out and gently stroked my cheek. The me on the screen didn't stir, didn't react, but I felt it. I swear I felt that touch, cold and menacing. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police, trying to explain what was happening. They didn't believe me, of course. Thought I was some paranoid nutjob. They sent a patrol car to do a drive-by, but that was it. No one took me seriously. I was alone, trapped in this waking nightmare. And then the final straw came. I found a note taped to my bathroom mirror one morning. It was written in blood, or something that looked horrifyingly like blood. Tonight, it read, tonight, you die. I'm sitting here now, writing this because I don't know what else to do. The sun is setting, and I'm too terrified to move. If anyone has any advice, please, I beg you, help me. I don't think I can survive the night. Hey again, Reddit. I'm back, and if you're still with me, thank you. I don't know how long I have to write this, so I'm going to get right into it. That night, the night they promised I would die, was the longest, most horrifying night of my life. I barricaded myself in my bedroom. I pushed my dresser against the door, stacked chairs, and anything else I could find to block any entry. I armed myself with a baseball bat and a kitchen knife, even though I knew deep down that it wouldn't be enough. My phone was clutched in my hand, but I knew calling the police again would be useless. They didn't believe me the first time. Why would they now? Every noise, every gust of wind made me jump. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. I stayed that way for hours, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of movement. And then, at around 3 a.m., I heard it. The unmistakable sound of someone trying to force the door open. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The door handle jiggled violently, and the sound of something sharp scraping against the wood filled the room. It was like they were trying to carve their way in. I backed up to the far corner of the room, holding the bat out in front of me like some kind of pathetic shield. Suddenly, the noises stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't dare move, didn't even breathe, straining to hear any hint of what might come next. And then my phone buzzed. A message. I knew who it was before I even looked, but I had to see. The screen lit up with a notification. A video file. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely open it. The video was dark and grainy, but I could make out what was happening. It was live footage of my hallway, right outside my bedroom door. The camera panned slowly, revealing a figure standing there, just inches from the door. They were dressed in all black, a hood covering their face, and they held a knife, long and gleaming, in one hand. The other hand was scratching at the door, methodically, almost playfully. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure on the screen tilted their head, as if listening for something, and then they turned to face the camera. Even though I couldn't see their face, I could feel their eyes on me, piercing through the lens, through the screen, and right into my soul. They raised a finger to where their lips would be, signaling for silence. Then the screen went black. The video ended, and I was left in the suffocating silence of my room. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't stay here, couldn't wait for them to break through the door. I needed to escape, but how? I remembered the fire escape outside my window. It was risky, but it was my only shot. I moved as quietly as I could, praying the old window wouldn't creak too loudly. I managed to get it open and slipped out into the cool night air. The metal of the fire escape was freezing against my bare feet, but I didn't care. I started climbing down, one agonizingly slow step at a time. About halfway down, I heard a crash from inside the apartment. They had broken through the barricade. Panic surged through me, and I started moving faster, nearly slipping in my haste. I made it to the ground and took off running, not caring where I was going, just needing to put as much distance between me and that nightmare as possible. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. I ended up in a park, collapsing onto a bench, gasping for breath. I pulled out my phone, desperate to see if I had any missed messages or calls. Instead, I found another video file waiting for me. My blood ran cold. This time, the video was of my bedroom. The camera moved through the wreckage of my barricade, slowly panning over the destruction. Then it focused on my bed, where I had been just minutes before. A message was scrawled across the sheets in what looked like blood. "You can't hide." I threw my phone away from me, as if that would somehow make it all stop. I was losing my mind. My life had turned into a horror movie, and there was no escape, no waking up from this nightmare. I sat there in the park, tears streaming down my face, feeling more alone and terrified than I ever had in my entire life. As the sun started to rise, I knew I couldn't go back to my apartment. I needed help, someone who would believe me, someone who could stop this. But who? Everyone I knew would think I was crazy. I was trapped, a prisoner of this unseen tormentor, and I didn't know how much longer I could survive. Hey, Reddit, I'm back again, and things have only gotten worse. After that night in the park, I knew I needed to find someone who could help, someone who wouldn't just dismiss me as a lunatic. I spent the entire day wandering the city, trying to think of anyone who might believe my story. That's when I remembered an old friend from college, Mike. He was into all sorts of conspiracy theories and underground hacking stuff. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it would be him. I made my way to Mike's place, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched the whole time. When I finally got there, I must have looked like hell, because Mike didn't even question my sudden appearance. He let me in, and I spilled everything. The Dark Web Assassin, the messages, the videos, the blood, everything. Mike didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. Instead, he nodded, listening intently, and then started asking questions. "Did you notice anything unusual before this started? Any weird emails? Strange behavior from anyone you know?" I shook my head. No, it just started out of nowhere. One day, I was fine, and the next, I was getting threats. Mike tapped away on his laptop, pulling up various hacking tools and dark web forums. "We need to figure out who this untraceable one really is. If we can find anything, a pattern, a trace, anything, we might be able to stop them." Hours passed as Mike dug deeper and deeper. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear. Finally, he looked up, his face grim. I found something. There's a lot of chatter about this untraceable one. Some people think it's not just one person, but a network of killers. They operate in cells, and they have someone on the inside. Someone with access to police databases, social media, everything. A chill ran down my spine. So they're using my own information against me. That's how they know everything? Mike nodded. Looks like it. They probably hacked into your accounts, your devices. They've been watching you for a while. I felt sick. The thought of someone monitoring my every move, listening to my conversations, watching me while I slept. It was too much. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike leaned back, thinking. We need to lure them out. Make them think they have you cornered, but we'll be ready for them. It's risky, but it might be our only shot. We spent the next few days setting up a trap. Mike hacked into my accounts, sending out false information to make it look like I was returning to my apartment. We set up cameras and alarms, hoping to catch them in the act. I was a nervous wreck, jumping at every sound, every shadow. The night of the trap, I hid in Mike's apartment, watching the live feed from the cameras. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I started to think maybe they had figured out our plan. Then just as dawn was breaking, one of the cameras picked up movement. A figure, dressed in black, slipping into my building. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them move through the halls, stopping outside my apartment door. They pulled out a set of lockpicks, working quickly and efficiently. Within minutes, they were inside. Mike and I exchanged a look. It was time. We grabbed the baseball bat and knife, my only pitiful defenses, and headed out. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to keep going. We crept through the building, trying to stay as quiet as possible. When we reached my apartment, the door was ajar. I could hear the intruder moving around inside, searching for me. Mike motioned for me to stay back, and then he burst through the door, yelling. The figure spun around, and I finally got a good look at them. They were tall, lean, with an air of cold efficiency. Their face was covered by a mask, but their eyes, those eyes were filled with a chilling, inhuman calm. Mike swung the bat, and the intruder dodged it with ease. They moved like a shadow, fast and fluid. I could see the glint of a knife in their hand. Mike and the intruder circled each other, each waiting for the other to make a move. Then, faster than I could follow, the intruder lunged. Mike managed to deflect the blow, but the knife sliced his arm. He grunted in pain, but didn't back down. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and watch him get killed. I ran forward, swinging the knife wildly. The intruder dodged me easily, knocking the knife out of my hand. They grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground. I struggled, gasping for air, my vision starting to blur. Mike tackled them from behind, and we all went down in a heap. Somehow, in the chaos, I managed to grab the knife again. I stabbed wildly, feeling the blade sink into flesh. The intruder screamed, a horrible, inhuman sound, and released me. I scrambled away, watching as they clutched their side, blood seeping through their fingers. Mike grabbed the bat and swung again, this time connecting with the intruder's head. They went down, hard, and didn't get back up. We stood there panting, staring at the still form on the floor. "We did it," Mike said, his voice shaky. "We actually did it." But even as relief washed over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. We had taken down one intruder, but how many more were out there? How long before they came for me again? Hey Reddit, it's me again. If you've been following my story, you know things have gone from bad to worse. I thought taking down that intruder would give me some peace, but I was wrong. So very wrong. If anything, it's only made things worse. After that night, Mike and I were a mess. We called the police, who finally took us seriously when they saw the body. They took statements, collected evidence, and promised to keep us updated. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't really understand what we were dealing with. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I couldn't go back to my apartment, so I stayed with Mike. We tried to keep busy, but the fear was always there, lurking in the background. Every time the phone rang, or there was a knock at the door, I jumped, convinced it was them coming to finish the job. And then the messages started again. This time, they were different, more personal, more threatening. One morning, I woke up to find a message written on the bathroom mirror in lipstick. You killed one of us. Now we'll kill you both. Mike and I went into full lockdown mode. We covered the windows, set up more cameras, and armed ourselves with whatever we could find. But it didn't matter. They found ways to get to us. One night we found a bloody knife on the kitchen table. Another time, a severed finger in the mailbox. Each message was clear. We were being hunted. Desperation drove us to find answers. Mike dug deeper into the dark web, looking for any clue that might help us. He stayed up for days, barely sleeping, barely eating. And then he found something. It was an old forum post, buried deep in a thread about urban legends and conspiracy theories. It talked about a group known as the Veiled Ones. They were a network of assassins, but more than that, they were a cult. They believed in some twisted ideology about cleansing the world, and they used the dark web to find and eliminate their targets. The more we read, the more it made sense. The Untraceable One wasn't just a person, it was a title, a mantle passed down within the cult. That's why they were so efficient, so unstoppable. And now, because we had killed one of their own, we were their prime targets. We knew we couldn't stay in one place. We had to run, keep moving, stay one step ahead of them. We packed what we could carry and left Mike's place, going on the run. But no matter where we went, they found us. Motel rooms, safe houses, even out-of-the-way cabins, in the woods. They always knew where we were. One night, we were holed up in a dingy motel on the outskirts of some forgotten town. We had been running for weeks, exhausted and scared out of our minds. Mike was hacking away on his laptop, trying to find something, anything that could help us. I was dozing off when a loud bang jolted me awake. Someone was pounding on the door. "Police! Open up!" My heart sank. This was it. They had found us. I grabbed the baseball bat, ready to fight, but Mike stopped me. "Wait," he whispered. "It could really be the police. We have to check." I nodded, and we cautiously opened the door. Two uniformed officers stood there, looking stern. "We've been looking for you," one of them said. "You need to come with us. It's not safe here." Mike and I exchanged a look. We didn't trust anyone, but what choice did we have? We followed the officers to their car, getting in the back seat. As they drove, I noticed we weren't heading towards any police station. Instead, we were going deeper into the woods. "Where are you taking us?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. The officer driving glanced back at me, a sinister smile creeping across his face. "To meet your fate." Mike and I tried to fight, but it was useless. They had us trapped. They drove us to a remote cabin, dragging us inside. The place was filled with strange symbols, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. They tied us to chairs, and a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the same masked figure from my apartment, or at least someone wearing the same mask. They spoke in a low, chilling voice. You thought you could escape us. You thought you could kill one of us and get away with it. But we are everywhere. We are always watching. They lifted the mask, revealing a scarred, twisted face. Now, you will pay for your defiance. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and terror. They tortured us, asking questions, demanding answers we didn't have. They wanted to know who else knew, who we had told. I could barely think through the pain, my mind fracturing under the onslaught. Eventually, they left us, tied and bleeding, in that hellish cabin. Mike was barely conscious, and I wasn't much better. I knew we didn't have much time. I had to get us out of there, but how? With what little strength I had left, I managed to free my hands. I untied Mike, shaking him awake. We have to go, I whispered, my voice hoarse. We have to move now. We stumbled out into the night, every step a battle. The forest was dark and disorienting, but we kept going, driven by sheer survival instinct. I don't know how long we walked, but eventually we saw lights, a small gas station, a beacon of hope. We collapsed inside, begging the clock to call the police. Real police this time. They arrived, and we were taken to the hospital, treated for our injuries. But I knew this wasn't over. They would come for us again. They would never stop. And now, I'm writing this from a hospital bed, knowing we have to keep running. I don't know how much longer we can survive, but we have to try. We have to stay one step ahead of the veiled ones, because if they catch us again, I know they won't let us escape. Hey, Reddit, this will be my last update. I don't know if we'll make it through this, but I need to get everything down just in case. Mike and I have been running for what feels like an eternity, but there's nowhere left to go. This is it, our final stand. After escaping the cabin, we spent a few days in the hospital under police protection. But even there, I didn't feel safe. The veiled ones had infiltrated the police once. They could do it again. We knew we had to disappear completely, go off the grid. Mike had an old contact, a guy who specialized in making people vanish. We scraped together what little money we had left and made our way to a dingy bar on the outskirts of the city. The contact, a grizzled man who went by the name of Hawk, agreed to help. He provided us with new identities, burner phones, and instructions on how to lay low. For a while, it seemed to work. We lived in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, cut off from the world. No internet, no phones, just us and the constant fear of being found. But deep down, we knew it was only a matter of time. One night, as we were preparing dinner, we heard the sound of a car approaching. Our blood ran cold. No one knew we were here. Mike grabbed the baseball bat, and I took the kitchen knife, the familiar weight of it both comforting and terrifying. We watched from the window as two figures got out of the car, both dressed in black. My heart pounded in my chest. It was them. They had found us. "We have to fight," Mike whispered, his voice shaking. "It's the only way." We barricaded the doors and windows as best we could and waited. The tension was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity. Then the pounding on the door started. They were trying to force their way in. "Come out," a voice called. It was cold, emotionless. "Make this easy on yourselves." Mike and I exchanged a look. There was no way we were giving up without a fight. "Fuck you," Mike shouted back. "You want us? Come and get us." The door splintered under their assault, and they burst through, knives gleaming in the dim light. The fight was brutal. Mike swung the bat with all his strength, connecting with one of the intruders' heads. They went down, but the other was on him in an instant, slashing with a knife. I lunged at the second intruder, the kitchen knife clutched in my hand. We struggled, rolling on the floor, each trying to gain the upper hand. Pain exploded in my side as their knife found its mark. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove my knife into their neck, the hot spray of blood blinding me. Finally, it was over. Both intruders lay dead on the floor, and Mike and I were left standing, battered and bleeding. But we knew it wasn't over. The veiled ones wouldn't stop until we were both dead. We had one last option. Hawk had mentioned a safe house, a place where we could go if things went south. It was our only hope. We gathered what little we had and left, driving through the night to a remote cabin deep in the mountains. The safe house was old and barely habitable, but it was hidden, and that was all that mattered. We patched ourselves up as best we could and settled in, waiting for the inevitable. Days turned into weeks, each one filled with dread. We knew they would come, and we were ready. One night, as a storm raged outside, we heard the sound of footsteps on the porch. Mike and I grabbed our weapons, our hearts pounding in unison. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Hawk. "Thought you might need some backup," he said, his voice gruff but reassuring. He was armed to the teeth, ready for a fight. "Thank you," I whispered, tears of relief streaming down my face. "Thank you." We fortified the cabin, setting traps and preparing for the final assault. And it came, just as we knew it would. A group of them, more than we had ever faced before. The battle was fierce, the air filled with the sounds of violence and screams. We fought with everything we had, Mike, Hawk, and I, side by side. One by one, we took them down, but they kept coming. I lost count of how many we killed, my mind a blur of blood and pain. Finally, it was over. The last of the veiled ones lay dead at our feet. We were alive, but just barely. Mike was bleeding heavily, his face pale. Hawk was injured too, but still standing. "We did it," I said, my voice trembling. "We actually did it." Hawk nodded, but there was no joy in his eyes. "This isn't the end. They'll send more. They won't stop until you're both dead." I knew he was right. We were alive, but we could never truly escape. The veiled ones would always be out there, always hunting. But for now, we had a moment of peace, a moment to breathe. We buried the bodies, cleaned the cabin, and prepared for whatever came next. We knew we couldn't stay here forever.